5 days. No food. No sunlight. No way out. The sound was barely audible, a faint, rhythmic knock echoing through 200 feet of black water and solid limestone. A knock that, by every rational calculation, should not have existed. The rescue team had already given up. The engines were cutting back, the dive line was being reeled in, and the operation was transitioning from one word to another, from rescue to recovery. And then, there it was again. That knock. What you're about to hear is not a story about luck. It's a story about the precise, terrifying intersection of physics, biology, and the unreasonable stubbornness of the human will to survive. And it happened in July 2025, inside a cave system so vast, so dark, and so indifferent to human life that calling it a cave almost feels like an insult. We've covered extreme isolation before on this channel. You might remember what we analyzed in the Nutty Putty Cave incident, where John Jones spent 28 hours upside down in a passage barely wider than his shoulders before rescuers made the impossible decision to seal the cave permanently. That case gave us a framework for understanding the psychological collapse that begins around hour 6. But what happened in China's Hunan province in the summer of 2025 broke every model we had. Because this man didn't collapse. And that, from an engineering standpoint, is almost more disturbing than if he had. It was late at night on July 19, 2025, when two men descended into the river Yushui. Not their first time. Not even close. The dive was routine by any standard, a descent into familiar water, well mapped, well understood. The kind of dive that breeds the most dangerous thing in any technical environment, complacency. Complacency is not a character flaw. It is a cognitive trap, built by repetition, reinforced by success. Every time you do the same thing and survive, your brain slightly downgrades the threat level. It's a survival heuristic that works, right up until it doesn't. 5 minutes into the dive, Wang's partner lost visual contact. Not unusual in low visibility water. He waited the standard interval, surfaced, waited again. And when Wang didn't appear, he did the only thing training demands. He went for help. What he didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Wang had already crossed a threshold that very few people ever cross and come back from. Approximately 30 feet below the river's surface, there is a crack in the rock. Not marked on any dive map. Not visible until you're already past it. And behind that crack lies the entrance to one of the most disorienting geological structures on the planet, the South China Karst cave system. 212,000 square miles of flooded tunnels, air pockets, narrow restrictions, and absolute, total darkness. It is not a cave. It is an underground world. Wang entered that world by accident. And here's where the engineering becomes critical. Because in any technical dive training protocol, cave diving certification especially, there is one rule above all others. It is called the rule of thirds. 1/3 of your air to go in. 1/3 to come out. 1/3 in reserve for emergencies. It is not a guideline. It is not a suggestion. It is the mathematical boundary between a dive and a death sentence. Wang, on a familiar river dive in familiar water, almost certainly was not applying cave dive protocols. He had no reason to. He wasn't cave diving. Until he was. His air cylinder, designed for a shallow, routine dive, began dropping in the way that cylinders do when a diver is stressed and breathing hard. 15%. 10%. The tunnels ahead of him didn't narrow. They branched. Every branch looked the same in his flashlight beam. And the further he went, the more the silt bloomed behind him, erasing any visual trace of his path. This is what cave divers call a silt out, and it is among the most documented causes of underground fatalities. We analyzed a near-identical mechanism in the Bystra cave case, where Alexei, the Yugoslav diver who vanished into the fifth sump in 1987, found himself tangled in his own guide rope in zero-visibility water. The physics are identical. The outcome doesn't have to be. At 4% air remaining, 4%, Wang found something that should not have been there. An air pocket. A small one, barely large enough to pull himself out of the water, carved into the limestone ceiling of the tunnel roughly 100 meters inside the cave entrance. He hauled himself onto the rock shelf inside it, stripped off his regulator, and took a breath. Not the poisoned breath that killed Paul Goss in the California well shaft. You remember that case? The diver who surfaced into a pocket rich in carbon dioxide and lost consciousness before he could put his regulator back in. This air was breathable. Barely, but breathable. Wang was alive. He was also 348 feet inside an unmapped cave system, with 4% air, no food, no way to communicate, and no way to know if anyone was even looking for him. But if you think that was the worst moment of those 5 days, you're wrong. The worst moment came 4 days later. And it came with a flashlight. Outside the cave, the machinery of rescue was already in motion. Wang's dive partner had surfaced and called for help within minutes. Police were notified. A specialist cave dive team from the police force was mobilized. But mobilized in the context of a flooded karst system does not mean fast. It means deliberate. Because in these environments, haste is not a virtue. Haste kills rescuers. The first dive team entered the water hoping to find a survivor. They were, by their own admission, already mentally preparing for what they actually expected to find, a body. They searched to a depth of 420 feet into the system, past Wang's actual location, and found nothing. No bubbles. No sound. No sign of life. This is the moment in a rescue operation when the language changes. When the incident commander stops using the word rescue and starts using the word recovery. It is not a failure of will. It is a calibration of probability. And by every probability model in the field, Wang should have been dead. But probability had failed to account for one thing, the air pocket. On the second day, rescue teams on the surface detected something strange. A sound. Intermittent, rhythmic, coming from somewhere inside the cave. The engines on the support boats were drowning it out, so the incident commander ordered them cut. And in the sudden silence, nothing. The sound had stopped. The team debated whether it had ever been real. Whether it was the cave itself settling, or water movement through the rock, or simple wishful thinking from rescuers who desperately wanted to believe someone was still alive in there. They decided to go back in anyway. Inside the air pocket, Wang had been doing the only thing available to him, surviving. He had fresh water. The cave water, filtered through limestone, was potable. He had light, his dive flashlight, rationed carefully. He had air. And he had, remarkably, food. Because in the water beneath his ledge, fish moved in the darkness. And Wang, using his hands in the beam of his flashlight, caught them and ate them raw. This is not a detail from a survival handbook. This is a man refusing, hour by hour, to accept the verdict the situation had already written for him. But here's what nobody talks about when they discuss survival psychology, the cognitive cost. Every hour in total isolation, the human brain begins to restructure its threat assessment. Sounds become signals. Silence becomes threat. The darkness stops being an absence of light and starts being a presence, something with weight, with texture, something that presses in from every direction. By day 3, Wang's world had shrunk to the size of a ledge, the sound of water, and the beam of one flashlight. By day 4, he had been alone longer than most people are ever truly alone in their entire lives. And then, on July 24th, day 5, he saw something. Deep below his ledge, through the dark water, flashlight beams. Moving. Sweeping across the tunnel walls in the pattern that only a searching diver makes. The rescue team was back. And they were passing directly below him. What Wang did next was not in any survival manual. He grabbed a loose piece of limestone from the cave wall and began hammering it against the rock as hard as he could. The sound traveled through water, through stone, through 200 feet of cave passage. And from above, from the surface, someone heard it. But the divers below him did not. They continued past. Heading deeper into the system, toward the 420-foot mark where they had searched before. Wang watched the lights disappear. And then there was nothing. This is the moment that should have broken him. By any measure, by any psychological model, by any physiological baseline, 5 days of isolation, near zero caloric intake, darkness, cold water, and now watching his only chance at rescue swim past without seeing him, should have produced a complete cognitive collapse. The kind of learned helplessness that researchers have documented in far shorter isolation periods. The kind that makes a person stop. Stop fighting. Stop knocking. Stop. Wang stopped knocking. And stopped watching. The dive team, having reached the far end of their search range with no result, turned back toward the entrance. They were moving back through the tunnel directly beneath his ledge, their last pass, their final sweep, when the water above them erupted. Not a knock this time. Not a careful, calculated signal. Wang had jumped in. He hit the water 3 feet from the divers. His flashlight beam cut sideways across the tunnel. And the rescue divers, who, by their own account, had fully accepted that this was a body recovery, looked up and saw a living man. The documentation from that moment is sparse. What we have is testimony. The lead diver later told journalists that Wang was, quote, beyond excited. That he was coherent, oriented, and physically mobile. That when they fitted him with a spare air cylinder and guided him back through 300 feet of underwater cave passage and finally up into the daylight, he walked, unassisted, to the waiting ambulance. And the first thing he said, after 5 days in the dark, after the fish in the limestone shelf and the flashlight beams passing below him, after the jump, he asked for a cigarette. Now, from a forensic standpoint, from the engineering perspective that this channel exists to apply, what is the actual lesson inside Wang's survival? Because there are two answers, and they point in opposite directions. The first answer is geological luck. The air pocket that saved Wang's life exists because of a specific confluence of limestone formation, water table pressure, and underground drainage patterns that are essentially random. There is no way to predict them, no way to map them in advance, and no way to deliberately seek one out when you're at 4% air in a flooded tunnel. It was, by any rigorous analysis, a chance event. Wang survived because the cave happened to contain a space that happened to be breathable. The second answer is behavioral. Wang did not passively inhabit his luck. He caught fish. He conserved his flashlight. He monitored the water below him for 5 days. He created a signal, the knocking, and maintained it across multiple rescue attempts even when it appeared to have failed. And when his last opportunity presented itself in a window measured in seconds, he was alert enough to recognize it and decisive enough to act. That is not luck. That is applied survival discipline under conditions that should have made discipline impossible. But here's the part of this incident that the rescue reports don't fully address, and it's the part that keeps forensic analysts like us awake. What happened on the first dive search, when the team passed within 100 meters of Wang and found nothing? The official record says they searched to 420 feet and turned back. Wang was at 348 feet. That math should have worked. The geometry should have put them within signaling range. The answer lies in acoustics. Underwater sound propagation in complex cave systems is not linear. Limestone walls, irregular tunnel geometry, and air-water interfaces create what acoustic engineers call a shadow zone, regions where sound simply does not travel in predictable directions. Wang's knocking on the first day may have been producing sound that traveled upward, into rock, rather than outward into water. The rescue team may have passed within 100 feet of a living man and heard nothing. This is the same phenomenon that complicated the search in the Bystra Cave incident, where the rescue team could hear bubbles rising from Alexei's position but couldn't determine direction or depth from the surface. Sound in these environments is a treacherous guide. And it is a gap in cave rescue protocols that has not been adequately addressed, even today. The Wang incident has prompted renewed discussion within the technical diving and cave rescue community about two things. First, the deployment of acoustic transponders, small, diver-operated devices that emit locatable signals, as standard equipment for any dive in proximity to known karst formations.
It's been 5 days.
Second, And more broadly, the
We barely made it out
reclassification of what
alive.
constitutes a routine dive in regions where surface water interfaces with karst geology. The South China Karst system underlies hundreds of rivers and lakes across multiple provinces. Any dive in those waters is, by geological fact, a potential cave dive. The protocols need to reflect that reality. The captain of the rescue team said it simply, and it's worth repeating: Wang was found on his last chance. One more pass and the team would have surfaced. The operation would have been formally reclassified. The next time those divers went in, they would have been looking for a body, not a man. There is no protocol in the world that guarantees you survive what Wang survived. But there is a protocol that guarantees the window of survival stays as wide as possible for as long as possible. And the lesson from the South China Karst system, from the river Yushui, from 5 days on a limestone shelf in absolute darkness, is that the window is always narrower than you think, and always open longer than physics says it should be. One walked to the ambulance. He asked for a cigarette. And somewhere beneath the river, the air pocket is still there, carved into the limestone by 10,000 years of water and pressure, waiting for the next diver who turns the wrong way at 30 feet below the surface. The cave does not care. It never did. It was never trying to kill him, and it was never trying to save him. It simply was. And in that indifference, Wang found the one thing that indifference cannot take away: the decision to keep knocking.